This is our next set of notes. This is number 52, I believe. It's called the Holocaust. This is a poem by Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. In Nazi Germany in 1933, there was a huge problem with anti-Semitism and with persecution of Jews. Once elected Chancellor of Germany in 1933, Adolf Hitler began to use anti-Semitic sentiments that already existed in Europe to his advantage. Creating a strong nationalist government, Jews were seen as foreigners who were not truly German and who were stealing jobs and money from Germany. They were often portrayed as rats or mice in anti-Semitic cartoons. In this cartoon here, you can see there is a Nazi swastika that has a knife at the bottom, and it is stabbing a mouse in the back. And you can tell that's a Jewish mouse because he's wearing a yarmulke there. And it says Jude, which is German for Jew, and it also has the Star of David, which is the symbol of the Jewish faith. So, in a lot of these anti-Semitic cartoons that the Nazis created, you could see this sort of symbolism. There's also a book that's very popular nowadays. It's called Mouse. It was written by a Holocaust survivor, I believe, and it shows the Nazis as cats and the Jews as mice, and it sort of shows the experiences of this survivor. Hitler, on the advice of his propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, decided to make all Jews wear a Star of David on their coats. It was a felt yellow Star of David with the word Jude patched in the middle, so you can see it there on the right. The point of this is that you label the Jews and you separate them from the German people. You are segregating the Jews from the rest of society. There are many places that Jews in Nazi Germany were not allowed to travel or live. So they're segregating them, they're making them seem different. There's a quote in my classroom on the wall. You've seen it a million times. Once you label me, you negate me. This is something that Hitler uses to try to separate the Jews from society. He says, oh, they're not German, they're Jews. He says, oh, they're not really, who you thought they were. They're somebody different. They're foreigners. They're invaders. By labeling people as others, it's a lot easier to eventually see them as others and to treat them like they're not even people. So you see this a lot in society. People will try to label a certain group. They'll try to basically segregate them from everybody else and put them in some little box, even though people are much more complicated than that. The Nazis towards the late 1930s began more extreme forms of control over the Jews. They began forcing them to live in ghettos that were surrounded by fences. Eventually, those ghettos were emptied into concentration camps. They would take the Jews that lived there and they would put them on trains and they would be transported to concentration camps. Concentration camps are just work camps all around the country and all around the territory that the Nazis control. And so in these concentration camps, the Jews are often forced to work. And in some cases, when you're no longer useful to the Nazis, they would just become extermination camps and they would kill people that were there. If you look at this sign, you can see Juden Beton verboten, which means like Jews are permitted to live here. And so you can see they're walking into this section of town and it's behind this barbed wire. And these people don't live there. They're just being forced to move in there. The concentration camps. When the Jews first arrive, a lot of them have no idea where they're going. There have been sometimes whispers and rumors of things, but people don't really know what's happening. The Nazis created concentration camps all over their territory, with most in Germany and Poland. The Nazis brought the Jews in like cattle on trains, which had been packed. So for days, sometimes these trains were packed full of people, and they eventually pull into the concentration camps. So you're already behind the fence; you can't jump out and run. And they allow you to disembark, and that's the last time families would see each other. Women and girls would go in one line, and boys and men in the other. In class, we were supposed to read the book Night by Elie Wiesel, and so I'm not sure how we can really do that. But in that story, Elie Wiesel, who was a survivor, talks about how the men that were standing around him when he was, 15 or 14 or whatever, they were trying to pick him up to make him look taller. And when a guard asks, you say that you're 18, not 14. And older people who were 60 would say that they're 50. And so they would lie about their ages to try and protect their survival. Unfortunately, though, a lot of people were taken straight to the gas chambers and executed. This is a look at where the concentration camps were in Poland and Germany and Austria. And so you can see the Nazis had these concentration camps. But in Poland, with those red areas, those are the death camps, the extermination camps. And the most famous of which is this one right here. It's called Auschwitz-Birkenau, and it's absolutely massive. It's just a gigantic camp. In U.S. history, when you're learning about it, sometimes they'll talk about Buchenwald or Dachau, as they were some of the first camps that were liberated by U.S. soldiers. The Soviets were the ones that eventually freed these camps. At Auschwitz, this is the gate, the main gate that people had to walk in and out of if they wanted to leave the camp. And above that is a frame on the gate that says Arbeit macht frei, which means work makes you free. Kind of ironic, because it doesn't. With these concentration camps, Jews were stripped of their clothes and forced to work in very, very cramped barracks, sleeping on wooden beds, basically, these wooden shelves. They were packed in there. People would die, and, you couldn't notice because you were just jammed in there so tight. It's very reminiscent, very similar to how the slaves were packed on the Middle Passage. They were very malnourished and only given the bare minimum that they needed to go on living. So oftentimes soup and bread, those kinds of things, that's what you would see. As you can see from these photos that were taken after the camps were liberated, you can see the bones of basically all of these men as they dropped, half of their body weight. Those who were unfit to work or deemed unneeded were used for medical experimentations, were killed in gas chambers and then cremated in ovens. The Nazis would strip prisoners of their clothes and have them shower before entering the gas chambers for faster disposal of the bodies. In the showers, the Nazis would basically lock the doors, and the Jews would be there, and from above someone would drop in a canister of Zyklon B, which is a poisonous gas which essentially kills you within minutes, sort of choking you and destroying your nervous system. If you look there, you can see the ovens, and these were the crematoriums, essentially, where they would destroy the bodies of Jews and prisoners who were no longer useful. Oftentimes, they actually had Jews working in the crematoriums, and so they would take the dead bodies and load them in there. But people did what they had to do to survive. In total, over 6 million Jews died, along with another 6 million Poles, those are Polish people, Slavs, Gypsies, homosexuals, and others who were deemed undesirable. The legacy. So few Jews escaped the Holocaust because the United States and the rest of the world refused to take in refugees that were fleeing Germany. There's a story called Refugee, which was a book that was written for kids. I can't remember the author off the top of my head. And in that story, There were, German kids that were trying to escape, and they came over on these boats to Cuba. They came to the United States, and countries just turned them back because it was the Great Depression. They said, we don't really need people here right now, especially Jews. We don't want you. You can go home. And so no one really saved these people when there was time. In the 1930s, people ignored them. Several factors led to U.S. inaction: hatred of Jews, economic fears, failure to report on the situation, failure of religious and political leaders to stand up and do something to fight the Nazis, and failure to speak out about the persecutions. So it was basically a communication failure, and the fact that there was anger and hatred and fear mixed in there. And so all these things led to inaction. You worry about yourself instead of worrying about others, and then you look up and these horrible things are happening because Hitler was trying to get rid of these people, and everyone kind of ignored it, and then he decided to solve the solution himself, which was to murder all these people. The Nuremberg trials were held after the war. They were for the purpose of bringing the Nazis to justice. So the Nazis and basically anyone who was responsible for the Holocaust, they were in a series of 13 trials between 1945 and 1949, where these high-ranking officials were basically indicted and charged with crimes against humanity. So if you were involved in the mass killing of people, if you had somehow made it easier for the Nazis to commit these war crimes, you could be held responsible. And so you can see there's a bunch of guys there, and U.S. peacekeeping forces there behind them. The creation of Israel. Breaking with the thinking of Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman pushes for the creation of an ethnically Jewish country. On November 29th, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 181. Part of the Arab nation known as Palestine would be partitioned or set aside for the Jewish people. This section of land included important holy sites to all three major religions in Jerusalem. So Israel is now in control of Jerusalem. Oh my gosh. Obviously, Jerusalem is important to Christians, as Jesus lived there. It's important to the Jews as it's now their ethnic site, their ethnic homeland. And there's some important sites like the Wailing Wall. And it's important to Muslims as they believe that the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven there. So all three major religions around the world are all really competing for this area, which makes it highly contested. Many Holocaust survivors made it their life's mission to share their stories about the Holocaust and to counteract Holocaust deniers who try to spread misinformation. Several survivors have written books and made public appearances throughout the United States and the rest of the world to remind us of our past. The American Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. has at least one survivor at the museum every day that it's open until these survivors eventually will die, probably in the next 10 years or so. If you look here, If you look here on the right, you can actually see a bunch of my students in the past. They were visiting the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and Jennifer Roy, I believe that's how you say it, and her book, The Yellow Star, she was there signing copies. So yeah, that's Allison Iliff and Leah Goss, I think, and Caitlin Frady, if you know them. So, all right. That's going to do it. I'll post more notes later. But yeah, the Holocaust is a super important topic, so we're going to probably stick around on it for a little while. Let me know if you have any questions.